guilt, anger, regret. You could call them the bricks that we use to build our own personal prisons. But what happens when words like that turn from emotional analogy to genuine circumstance? When the damage these concepts can do falls outside of the psychological and into the realm of reality? Well, I can't say that I'm glad you asked, but we're gonna find out one way or another. What's up, guys? I'm Jared, and this is Avalanche Reviews.
Can you help me? Or are you lost too?
Post-Trauma is a survival horror title developed by a small indie studio from Spain called Red Soul Games. And in the modern genre revival we find ourselves in, you may have noticed a bit of a running theme. Of course, there are exceptions to this and really any other rule, but for the most part, games currently being released under the umbrella of survival horror tend to fall somewhere on the spectrum between the two undisputed giants of the style, Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The Resident Evil side commonly offers a more mechanical focus, things like moment-to-moment decision-making, combat, and limited resources, while the Silent Hill side tends to lean harder on elements like interpretive storytelling, symbolism, and psychological theming. Well, today's subject very much lives its life on the far end of the SH side of things, so it'd probably be best if you go ahead and prepare yourself for everything that entails right up front, because we're about to go on a ride straight into the human psyche, where the thin line that separates the mental and physical definitions of the word suffering starts to blur.
I'm sorry. I don't know where I am.
Our story begins with almost no information, which is a state you should probably go ahead and get comfortable with because you'll be spending a lot of time in it from here on out. We're given a first-person perspective of someone holding a gun as he puts it to the head of what appears to be a broken, tortured man referred to as Monster in the subtitles. Then we, the player, are put in the driver's seat and forced to pull the trigger. And believe me, I tried waiting it out. No dice. You're gonna have to get your hands dirty if you want to start this game up. Speaking of which, right about the same time our victim's last thoughts go flying out of his forehead, we take on another role, this time in the form of an old man waking up on a train. He's very obviously disoriented and has no idea where he is or how he got there. Now, if you're playing in 4K and looking really close, you should be able to just make out his name on the ID badge that he's wearing, but as we continue, we'll just follow the information the game sees fit to give out, and only when that well stops producing will we roll up our sleeves and get down and dirty with theory crafting and unspoken details. Meaning, for the moment, all we really know is that we're controlling this guy and he's trapped on a train. So he does the only thing he can, or what anyone else would, explores the place for clues, and as he does, we get the feeling that there's something more ominous going on here than a few locked train doors. The advertisements on the wall read more like subconscious details that a dreaming mind would come up with than they do actual ads. A combination of words and imagery that from afar may give off the fleeting impression of coherence, but upon closer inspection are just gibberish. If you're looking close enough though, a bit of meaning may just jump out at you, like here where you can read Hitori Tabi in hiragana, which can be translated as traveling alone or a lonely journey. After trying to use the intercom, more of the train is opened up and we gain access to a section mostly lit by a single red light and containing a whole lot of mannequins. You should be paying attention though, because this train car right here is setting us up for a lot of what we can expect moving forward. All over the place in this game, mannequins can be found in the kind of poses that seem to suggest they were at one point regular people just going about their days, or some sort of simulacrum meant to represent that idea. But I would say more importantly, the starting area teaches us that to get anywhere in post-trauma, we are going to have to pay very close attention to the environment. The graffiti on the train gives us a portion of the combo to a lock on the door, but it's only a small piece of the puzzle. In order to get the full answer, our guy's gonna have to combine a few different line maps, of course each one lacking a bit of info, to get numerical values for each line, as well as figuring out that each line intersection means adding those numbers up. We'll get heavier into this subject a little later on, but suffice it to say, post-trauma is very much in the business of challenging your mind, and the puzzles it uses to do that are some of the best that I've genuinely ever come across. By the way, you guys know what I love? Getting jump scared by an exploding light bulb. On the plus side, we now have a flashlight at our disposal, and if your detective skills are up to snuff, you should also have the combination to the locked door. Now please excuse me as I use some video editing magic to make it look like I got the answer right on the first try and didn't have to go back to look at the line maps 2 more times. Speaking of which, you're gonna save your main character a whole lot of shoe leather if you keep a phone handy for taking pictures, or if you're in a pinch, a notepad. Trust me, with this game, inscribing clues onto a stone tablet would be a better use of your time than trying to remember every single background element you think might be tied to a puzzle. Alright, so we're making progress now. We've gained access to the conductor's cabin and stopped the train. So far, well, maybe not good, but definitely less bad. After walking through a lonely, dark train tunnel, we come across what may as well be a beacon in the night. A brightly colored, well-lit train stop that sort of feels like if a European and Japanese train station had some kind of a bastard offspring. And you know, at this point, I'm just not going to be able to avoid the subject anymore. Post-trauma has what I would unironically call one of the very best cameras in horror games, period. I really mean that. No matter where you are in this game, you can count on being able to see that location from some of the most artistically pleasing and psychologically effective angles imaginable. And as if it was made from mine own hands, it offers a combination of my 2 favorite methods of perspective in classic survival horror. Your tried and true fixed camera, and one that follows the player on a fixed track. A combination of incredible systems that gives you all the best stylistic features of a camera that the player can't directly control, with all of the dynamic, cinema-esque flourishes of one that they can. With these 2 duct-taped together styles, the developer has complete control over highlighting points of interest or playing with our minds through the use of Dutch angles or visually uncomfortable positions, but simultaneously still giving us the kind of movement and dynamic feel that'll make you forget you can't actually control what you're looking at. Well, I guess that's not totally true. You do have a few degrees of adjustment in any direction on most screens, but to be honest, I mostly left that option alone and let the game take over because my input only served to ruin the effect. If you're looking for proof of this, there's a small section that actually gives you full third-person control of the camera, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this area feels the most comparably cheap and kind of amateur out of every other location in the game. Not for lack of imagination, bad design, or anything like that, but I think it's the artistically impressive fixed angles not being present here that proves exactly how valuable they are to the game's atmosphere and overall polished feel. Having such a bog-standard view of Roman's animations and the world around him seems to actively suck away a lot of the style that the game proudly displays in other locations, proving that it's not so much about how good the assets in the game look, but how you're viewing them that's really important. I genuinely feel like if I would have played the full game with this sort of control over the perspective, it wouldn't have carved out such a big hole in my memory and embedded itself there quite as deeply. Look, I'm gonna be as honest as I can here without sounding like I'm moving over into hyperbole. This is without a doubt the best looking and feeling camera system I have ever come across in a third-person video game. And further, the fact that it's packed into a low-budget indie title is just incredible. So game devs of any type or background, be warned. The bar has officially been raised and you're gonna have one hell of a time clearing it. As we proceed forward into the station, there are a few roadblocks in the way, and conveniently, two of them require the same tool to get past. We clear the first by forcing open a gate with a crowbar, and that gets us into a hallway filled with body bags and some creepy design elements that take normal or more mundane items and places them in a way that kind of hits you in the uncanny valley part of your brain that freaks you out for some reason when you look at them. But as we continue, we'll see... Hold on. Oh good, there's a person there. This is perfect. Maybe they'll know where we are and how the hell we can get out. Alright, so body horror is most definitely on the menu here. Good to know for the future, but I guess we should probably talk about what just happened. The combat you engage in post-trauma is not quite as janky as what you might find in, say, Silent Hill 2, but not exactly as refined as what's in its remake. You will eventually get access to firearms, which feel about as good as they do in any other game. But since ammo is in such short supply, you're going to be using a variety of melee-based implements most of the time, and honestly, it's not a bad system. It's just not very complex either. Clicking down on the right thumbstick will lock you onto an enemy, and as you get further into this nightmare, you'll start to see that's not the set it and forget it kind of mechanic it may seem like at first. Sometimes, mostly in boss fights, it's going to be a good idea to unlock from an enemy for a brief moment so you can regain your normal movement and run speeds in order to avoid an attack. But since we are already on that subject, you're also given a quick backwards dodge at the press of the B button, which is nice to have and I feel like is balanced mostly okay, in theory. So you've got this stamina meter up here on the left, and both your attacks and dodges drain it, so you can't exactly go wild with either in quick succession. But really the best nerf they gave this move is the fact that it only ever moves you in one direction, and once your back is up against the wall, you'll either have to get good at positioning yourself so that a dodge propels you out of that predicament, or get good at working around its limitations by unlocking from the enemy and running away. All that being said though, the combat here is easy enough that I would imagine most people will beat the game only dying once or twice. As long as you only attack once, then dodge right after and give yourself another second before the next volley, you're gonna make it out of most encounters without a single scratch. So if you want my advice, maybe start the game in hard mode for a challenge that feels a little more appropriate for this type of game. After survival horroring your way through the train station, yes that is a verb, don't look that up, you'll end up turning the power back on and afterwards making it into a room where we finally get to hear the voice of another person. More on that specific note later. The voice over the intercom is about as cryptic and frustrating to talk to as any resident of that quiet little foggy town on Toluca Lake, but at least she does give us the code to a locked door that we came across previously. She says that she was told to do that, but refuses to elaborate. On the plus side though, at the end of this really combative conversation, we come away with two very juicy pieces of information. Her name is Jill, and ours is Roman. Yeah, post-trauma is the type of title where learning the main protagonist's name is considered a massive lore dump. Well anyway, we at least know more than we did before the conversation. We might as well head over to that door now and hope it takes us somewhere nice. After Roman gets absolutely smoked by an oncoming train, we shift perspectives both literally and figuratively to a first-person segment where we take control of, well, we don't officially know who we are just yet. But if you're the kind of person who pays attention to details, you might remember this same voice and first-person view from the very start of the game, and the subtitles there refer to him as Carlos, so I guess we will too. And this guy wakes up in a similar fashion to Roman. He's disoriented, not sure how he got here, and understandably scared. The place we're stuck in is a police station, and for some reason the lower floors are flooded. The doors and windows are covered in that same kind of organic tentacle-looking stuff from the train station, and if you guess we'd have to solve a bunch of puzzles to gain any progress here, Good job, you've been paying attention. Using color-coded darts on a dartboard and color-coded images on the scatter computer monitors, we learn the code to the holding cells where we get our hands on the key to the chief's office. So we'll just go ahead and walk over there real quick, safe in the knowledge that there is not some sort of aquatic nightmare beast patrolling the flooded section now. After getting the chief's key card, we can now open up an evidence locker where Carlos grabs the wheel required to open this big iron door. Only this ends up being less of an exit and more of a reset switch.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Once the camera fades to black, we're thrown back in Roman's shoes as he wakes up in a hospital, and there's a lot to be learned here, both in the form of tangible information and the more inferred kind. From the employee records room, we use a few nurses' birthdays and ID numbers to put together their passwords, and that grants us access to their computers. Nurse Hayashi's PC contains a log from what we can assume was a pretty big disaster. The ER was filled over capacity, and it mentions a crash of some kind. It also mentions a patient who ended up with a pair of keys embedded in her skull, whose pregnant sister was pronounced dead at the scene of the incident. Since the log also talks about the surviving sister being found wandering in the bathroom, we head there next to, retrieve the keys from her head. Now A, obviously gross, but B, you may recognize the ghastly figure Roman's currently digging into from her first appearance on the train, which means now we're really cooking. We don't exactly have much to work with, but we've got the main character's name, some kind of repeating figure in the form of this long-haired mannequin, and a mass casualty event that seems to have some relevance. Moving further into the hospital, in one of the exam rooms, Roman finds the same long-haired mannequin gripping a scalpel in such a way that it makes her ultimate fate sort of clear. But after that, he comes across a phone ringing in a bathroom. You know, actually, I was just thinking, you take the keys getting dug out of the skull and this phone on a toilet, and you've got yourself one complete Silent Hill 2 reference. Answering it, we get to talk to Jill again, resulting in a conversation that only cements the aggression you may have picked up on the first time they spoke. It's becoming more and more clear that while Roman has no idea who Jill is, she definitely knows him and is not his biggest fan.
I don't understand. Why are you hungry?
Don't you dare.
During the conversation, we can see that Roman's being spied on by someone, but believe it or not, that's not all too important at the moment. What is, though, is that Roman put together a few components to make an acid that'll get him through a blocked door. One of the ingredients being a slab of flesh from this god-awful amalgamation of human body parts ranging from recognizable to, well, the opposite of that. Once the acid's been mixed together and the door opened, Roman walks in on this scene. A dead woman in a hospital bed with the sound of somebody crying somewhere else in the room. Upon approaching the woman's body, we finally get to meet Jill, and as someone who often gets the comment that I don't look like what people would expect from just hearing my voice, I kind of sympathize with her.
Oh God, it's you. You mean
Get out.
Now Jill's acting really protective of the woman in the bed, and she's just flat out pissed at Roman, who has no idea why, until it seems like realization suddenly washes over him. However, that's not something he's willing to say out loud right now. So while we don't know all of the particulars just yet, we can use the knowledge we gained at the hospital to assume this person is the pregnant woman who died, making Jill her sister. As Roman gets kicked out of the room, Jill mentions that this place, it breaks people, and she's willing to endure just about anything to watch him go through that process. As this little confrontation wraps up, we again notice our voyeuristic observer. Once confronted, it seems obvious this guy knows a lot more than us, but he's certainly in no hurry to share any of that with Roman. Judging off of his voice, I think we can finally put a face to Carlos, the guy from the first-person sections. And as the conversation wraps up, we're left with this honest-to-goodness gem.
this hell?
Hell would have meaning. This is just us and our gloom.
At this point, Roman's desperate for just a shred of an answer to any of his questions, even if it's coming from this creep show. So he gives chase through the weird hole in the wall, but instead of following where that spits him out, let's talk about the general gameplay here. Like I said at the start of the video, post-trauma skews far into the Silent Hill side of the survival horror spectrum, which means a lot more of a focus on things like puzzles and story interpretation than you would normally find in your average Resident Evil coded indie game. And in terms of the former, I gotta say, these very well may be some of my favorite all-time puzzles in the genre. Now, it definitely helps that there's a really good game propping these things up, but I think the main word that comes to mind when trying to figure out why I like these puzzles so much is balance. If you've ever played a survival horror game before, you probably come to this point. You're trucking away, making progress and exploring a really cool, creepy location until all of a sudden you run into a wall. That wall being a puzzle that just beats your ass, intellectually speaking. Even though you've run through every room you have access to and looked at every file in your inventory, still its solution eludes you. Now, of course, there are merits to this type of situation. I mean, a puzzle being challenging and requiring deep thinking is not in and of itself a bad thing. But there is something to be said for puzzles that work hand in hand with the typical gameplay progression to make for a much smoother experience. And I think it's in this perfect middle ground between challenge and intuition where post-trauma has chosen to build its forever home. Now don't get it twisted, the roadblocks you'll run into here, they're 100% going to require a keen eye and an even sharper mind to get through, but that being said, at least in my case, they also didn't stop me in my tracks for very long. I found the logic behind each one to be fairly easy to grasp. Meaning when I first approach one, I may not have its solution in mind yet, but I've got a pretty good idea at how I might be able to arrive at it. Now the only problem with that being the case is if I go too far into an explanation or start giving specific examples, I'm going to spoil at least some semblance of what I'm praising here. So you'll have to forgive me for being a little vague, but I can't stress enough how well the puzzles in this game worked for me. They provided this perfectly balanced challenge that kept me engaged and thinking, but not for so long that I felt the nagging desire to just look up the solution in order to proceed. Because I gotta admit, if I'm not enjoying the process of solving a puzzle, or I feel like I've already put everything I have into it but I've made no progress, I've got no issues just looking that shit up. I mean, I've done it before with games that I cover here on the channel, and I've got the feeling I'll do it again at some point. I mean, at the end of the day, I play these games to enjoy them, and if I'm not, I am nowhere near too proud to look up a guide. And you know, writing this script, really trying to figure out not only what made these things so special to me, but how I could verbally explain it to you, it's been a challenge. Ironically, one much tougher than the subject I'm trying to analyze, but I think I've arrived at something resembling an answer. For all the pondering that you'll do when encountering one of these puzzles, all of the pixel hunting for clues, in reality, where post-trauma thrives most is in subverting the information it actually does give to you. For example, here in this section, you'll find a bunch of computer monitors displaying some sort of symbols, and downstairs you'll come across a glossary of those same symbols along with their numeric values. So the nearby keypad-locked safe should be a cinch to get into. But if we look at this scene again, some of you might notice that the information we're getting is a little less than straightforward. Now, for those of you that do notice what I'm talking about, this may appear relatively simplistic for all the smoke I've been blowing up this game's ass, but keep in mind, like I said, I'm trying my hardest not to spoil the genuine dopamine rush that comes from solving these things on your own. Essentially, it's a small, less complex example of what seems to be post-trauma's favorite trick to pull. Even when it's giving you the solution outright, it's going to be in a way that'll still have you problem solving. Like sure, here's A and then C. Now have fun trying to figure out what B is and why the hell it's upside down. But it's right here where this subject gets a little complicated. Throughout the process of playing this game, I really struggled with the idea of how I was going to describe this specific part of it because it could be easy to hear everything I'm saying and interpret it as post-trauma having easy puzzles, which, by the way, I don't think is true at all. I mean, compared to your average classic Silent Hill title, which to me is the gold standard for more cognitive-heavy puzzles, I'd say I spent a comparable amount of time just scratching my head and looking at disparate pieces of info. I just didn't have to devote as much gameplay time to obtaining those pieces. So the challenge is just as present as it would be in any other puzzle-heavy survival horror game, but it feels like the process of finding a solution has been streamlined so that it requires a little more thinking and a little less footwork. Or at least that can be the case. Earlier on, I advised you guys to keep a phone handy when playing this game, and that was a dead serious tip. Because to account for, or maybe balance the different approach to challenge that we're talking about here, post-trauma has absolutely no issues solely relying on you to keep track of all the information you come across. And I do mean all of it. You do not have access to a map in your inventory or the option to reread files. So trust me, wasting a bit of time taking a picture of some random graffiti only to later find out it has no relevance is nothing compared to arriving at a puzzle, having it jog a vague memory of a room you might have seen related pieces of info in, and now having to track through the entire building looking for it. And on that note, I was ready to rant and rave about the whole not having a map thing being a huge downside, but having beaten the game, I'm not so sure I feel that way anymore. Now, to be fair to the game, you do have access to these scattered "you are here" sort of floor maps that you would actually find in the real world, but to be honest, I didn't find these to be a very good substitute. I mean, only being able to see them in a few locations makes them way less than convenient, and most of the time I felt like it was faster just to try doors out till my memory of the area was jogged into remembering where my destination was. I feel like everything I'm talking about right now is sort of like survival horror heresy. I mean, think back on your favorite genre titles. Yeah, there's a 100% chance every single one that you're thinking of includes a map to track progress or orient yourself. And like you might expect, it can be sort of difficult to get around in post-trauma without one. But when I look back on my time with the game, I don't know, it might actually work really well here. Normally, you, me, and everyone else would probably assume that this would be due to the player needing to explore and backtrack through smaller, more simplistic settings, but I don't think that's the entire case here. Actually, I think it may be the camera that I talk so much about that helps this out the most. Each area gets split up into tons of these really unique angles, which works together with the impressively functional environment design to make the lack of a map not really a big deal at all. I mean, after walking through some of these sections and seeing how cool they look through whatever weird-ass camera angle the game decides to use, it's surprisingly easy to commit most of them to memory right off the bat. So in the end, I found that navigating the environment strictly using my brain power, which, by the way, is something I never excel at in games, seems to be much more viable here, which is great because it's also sort of necessary. But hey, let's catch back up with Roman and see what happened with the fleshy butthole in the wall situation.
Wait!
After stepping through, we find ourselves in a very, very different environment from what the game has made us accustomed to so far. Instead of the harsh glow of scattered overhead fluorescence, we find the nearly all-enveloping presence of natural golden sunlight. And Roman's organic surroundings aren't human skin stretched over tentacles anymore, but flowers, grass, and trees. It honestly makes for a great palate cleanser, but I feel like there's still a bit of gloom to be found here. I mean, the orange dusk that we're seeing is certainly beautiful, but at the same time, and this might just be me, but it almost threatens the idea that this sunlight will soon disappear, making way for the black of night. However, outside of my failed digital art degree level of analysis, Roman also comes across a makeshift memorial for someone named Helen. And for the moment, just about the only things to be learned here is that she's dead, and a lot of people seem to have liked her. Moving on from here, we come across what appears to be a school, and appropriately, a school-aged girl. Now, Roman's pretty stoked to see another regular person, but she tells him that he's not supposed to be here. And before they can really discuss that, she gets snatched up by one of this place's monsters.
Why are you here?
So Roman sets out to save her life and return her dropped phone, which I would imagine to the average modern teenager, those two carry the same amount of value. Outside of some great survival horror exploration and puzzle solving, one of the most important finds in this section comes in the form of the game's mannequin theme. In the girls' restroom, we find one that seems to have checked out a little early, and much later on, another one that gives us a pretty on-the-nose hint at what may have driven or contributed to the previous scene. After some further exploration, this place reveals itself to be some sort of a religious institution, which for some reason makes the already horrible act that it's hinting at seem even more devious. Once we make our way to the chapel, Roman finally catches up with the girl from earlier and tosses her the phone. Because she's mute, this is her only form of communication with him, and she uses it to make it clear that she doesn't really trust Roman, but also that she doesn't want her presence to cause him to come to any harm. After a bit of back and forth, we find out that her name's Freya, and that's about all that we have time for because at the moment we've got a boss fight to deal with. It's sad to say, but Roman isn't exactly the cage-fighting powerhouse that his fit build may imply, and just when it looks like this angelic-looking animated statue has him on the ropes, ironically we get something approaching divine intervention. After the fight, Roman is left unconscious, which gives us a chance to take on the role of Freya as she tries to make her way to the school nurse's office for some smelling salts to wake him up, which is really a surprisingly simple affair. I mean, it's just a matter of reading through a manual on basketball scoring rules and then a transcript of the latest game to be played in the school court to recreate the correct scores and fouls and then assign them to the right teams because, of course, that's not readily available information. Then grab the weighted piece that grants you, take it over to the music class metronome, recreate the rhythm of 3 items scattered around the school, and bam, you've got yourself a key to the nurse's office. Easy peasy. So Freya takes the smelling salts to Roman, which has the desired effect, and we are treated to the most informative and normal conversation in the game so far, as well as the introduction of a genuinely cute and endearing character.
I don't recognize this one.
Weird. Sounds like a mystery.
It's yours, though. It's yours, right? This is your school.
Nice work, Mr. Detective.
Freya is an absolute ball of sarcasm, but behind it all you can tell that she's scared not only for herself but at the idea that her baggage might somehow get Roman more hurt than he already is. Together, the two pool their collective knowledge and experience, and we get a sort of best guess on what's going on here. Now, Roman is at first a little taken back by this place, since all the locations that he's woken up in so far have been places that tie into him in some way, but then he realizes this is Freya's school. That being the case, it confirms a theory of his that this place that they're trapped in uses their memories to torture them. So he asks Freya about the girl in the memorial, Helen, and what she has to do with all of this. And in response, Freya is pretty damn forthcoming with him.
Did you know her?
Yeah, I killed her. I think. Wish I hadn't said that.
Well, okay, so the picture hasn't quite come into focus yet, but we can start to make out a few blurry details that weren't so recognizable before. But that's for later. As for now, together the two head for another one of those fleshy wormholes, which shoots Roman out into a strange, ancient, ruinous maze sans Freya. And walking around this place, it's really easy to get the idea that it's some sort of middle ground between the contents of Roman's brain and whatever this place actually is. After a few key items have been gathered together, Roman stumbles onto Freya, and this scene, along with just about every other one that she's in, really cements her as a lovable character.
Old man.
Oh, shit, Freya. You're gonna give me a heart attack.
Language.
During the conversation, the two decide that two heads are definitely better than one when it comes to finding a way out of this nightmare world, so they agree to stick together from here on out. Which is a great idea, but it seems like maybe this place has other plans. After Roman has most of his bodily organs mashed out of his many orifices, we wake up behind the eyes of Carlos once again. He seems to be keeping a running tally of all the resets he's experienced, and he's taken to keeping conversation with the mannequins scattered around as if they were still the people from the real world that they're meant to represent.
Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate your fresh eyes. The rest of you could take a few notes.
Which might be the most worrying reflection on the status of his mental state if he wasn't planning on heading downstairs to once again murder the person from the intro of the game. At the moment, we've got no idea why Carlos keeps up this pattern of killing the guy, but we can assume that he harbors a little more than hatred for him. Carlos sees this person as scum, and the pattern of killing him every day only to wait for him to reset so he can kill him again is personal. Something that's being done to satiate one hell of a need for something we're not really sure of. Once Carlos gets his hands on a firearm, he walks into the room where he keeps this guy, and we find out that his name is Henry. Compared to how he looked in the intro, my guy has gone through a ghastly transformation, which actually makes sense. Keep in mind that Jill revealed to Roman that these cycles of life and death have a warping effect on people, and if the tally that Carlos is keeping is accurate, this guy's been through that cycle at least 67 times. Well, I guess make that 68.
Again.
After Carlos finishes off his latest contribution to Henry's suffering, Roman wakes up inside the train station again. Only this time, things have become a little less stable, for lack of a better word. Aspects of the hospital are beginning to bleed through, and I would assume this is the sign of the gloom starting to corrupt him. Oh, by the way, Carlos, he sort of coined the term gloom, so we're going to be using that from now on. When Roman heads down the platform, he's confronted by Jill, and she confirms that the gloom is indeed starting to eat away at his humanity. Our guy tries to recruit her to his newly found escape party, but Jill says that the only thing she desires is to watch Roman go through the full process of losing himself here in this place. And that really is a shame, because he genuinely seems to feel remorse for the role that he assumingly played in both Jill and her sister's death. We're still not given any specifics on that front, but for the kind of game this is, that's kind of par for the course. So after Jill slinks away to continue watching Roman suffer, he runs into this absolute nightmare of a creature. And after I spent about 5 or 6 minutes figuring out I'm actually supposed to fight it instead of running away, we get our hands on an employee ID card, which in a roundabout way results in Roman driving this train through what a doctor's camera sees during a rectal exam. Proceeding through and into the building beyond this gate here, Roman finds himself back in the hospital, and just like the train station, this place is also showing signs of Roman's descent into losing himself. After we've worked our way through this mashup of important places to Roman, we find Jill waiting for us. I guess she's become a little too impatient to let the gloom work its corrosive magic on him, so she's ready to step in and make her own contribution. On an important note though, we find out that Jill has been talking to Carlos, and that is going to come into play later. And once again, Roman is really trying his hardest to be a stand-up guy here. He still hasn't revealed out loud what he did to Jill, but he's dead set on trying to make up for it, or at the very least not piling on more trauma. Sadly though, that's just not in the cards, because this Spider-Woman has a vendetta and she's out for blood, making this the absolute worst kind of boss fight. Because ideally, you'd want to feel a sense of triumph after defeating a bad guy in a video game, but with dialogue like this, you aren't exactly going to be coming out of this fight feeling good about yourself. Moving on from that emotionally devastating moment, Roman gets a chance to confront Carlos, and it turns out his involvement in the whole revenge mission thing was a result of some sort of morbid sense of boredom. And that seems to be his MO here, poking and prodding at the gloom to see how it operates. Only the instruments that he uses in these experiments are the other people who end up getting stuck here. For example, this door here is the only threshold that Carlos can't openly pass through, so in his curiosity, he convinced others to try and walk out the door, and the results were, from what he could tell, less than desirable.
You could hear them for the first few minutes. Whatever's beyond that path is far worse than this place.
On the plus side though, Carlos reveals that the Gloom has a king, and even though he can't get the guy to talk to him, Roman figures if there's any way to get some sort of concrete info on leaving this place, the king would be where he'd find it. So Roman hops back on his train and heads in some vague direction till he ends up in whatever this place is. And just as he arrives, we're met with some really great news. Not only is Freya still alive, but her sarcasm is even stronger than ever.
You see that island out there?
No, I'm mute and blind, actually.
Here's the thing though, everything past this point dips way too far into spoiler territory than I would like, and one of the best aspects of post-trauma is taking the bits and pieces that it gives you and working them into some sort of conclusive whole. So that being the case, if you are interested in completing this puzzle on your own, do me a favor and skip to the timestamp on screen or past the chapter marked spoilers. Don't worry, once I'm done with all the gritty details, we'll all meet back up and do a little light summarizing.
Can you keep up?
You know, I can't.
I'll go slow for you.
Alright, so after working our way through a very interesting location and what is easily the most annoying puzzle I've come across in a very long time, we'll talk about that later, Roman and Freya make their way to the guy that Carlos calls the King. Only he describes himself more like a fallen angel. And I hate to burst your bubble, but the game is not going to elaborate on his origin story, which, I don't know, is sort of expected but also kind of a gut punch. More importantly though, the guy that will just go ahead and keep calling the King says that it is indeed possible to make it through the exit door that Carlos told us about, but there's a bit of a built-in requirement. It takes 2 people to walk through it, and each one has to do it unburdened. Now, if the obvious allegory hasn't been painfully clear so far, the Gloom is a place that feeds on people with baggage of some kind, and to be able to leave it, you not only have to break that metaphorical chain, but you'll need to bring someone with you that's willing to believe you are truly free of that burden. Now, Roman being the absolute cutie pie that he is, he actually asks if the King would be willing to escape with him and Freya, but the King says that his chain is far too heavy. Essentially, this place exists because of something that he did thousands of years ago, and his punishment for the torture that people go through here is for him to stay inside of his own creation. Well, alright then, we have at least some kind of an idea of what we're doing and where we need to do it. I wouldn't say that things are coming together, but at the very least, they're starting to get a little less fractured. Hopping back on the train, Roman and Freya head back to the door, but on the way they're attacked by Jill, who is still very much intent on killing Roman. And I hope you haven't put your controller down because this moment is actually very important to the ending that you get. Now, we're about to cover said finale, so I won't go into specifics yet, but in order to get the good ending, you need to not only know that you have control during what appears to be a cutscene, but also that there's something up ahead that's going to require you to stop or Jill will get crushed. Now, it needs to be said that I like the idea behind this move in spirit. But A, like I already said, there's not a lot to indicate that you have control over the train during this scene, and B, it would make a lot more sense for something like this to come into play during your boss fight with Jill. To be honest, I had already assumed that this was the case because as you attack her, instead of getting angry, she begs you to stop hurting her. I thought that was a pretty clear indication that I was actually supposed to let her defeat me. And ideally, that would have been the deciding factor for the ending that I got. I can't really say why, but it just feels more appropriate to me than this single moment that gives you no warning or indication that stopping's even an option. I mean, the only reason I was able to actually get the good ending was I had to replay that section to grab some footage, and I was trying to skip the cutscene when I found out that it wasn't one. Anyway, once our 2 travelers get to the exit, they're greeted by Carlos, and Freya has him pegged in record time.
Don't listen to him.
Yeah, creep vibes.
And since the 2 are dead set on trying this exit, Carlos decides that he's gonna watch this play out and see what happens, which seems pretty on brand for him. After this scene, we're served up the final boss fight, which in true survival horror fashion requires more puzzle solving than combat. And to be honest, when my brain finally latched on to what I needed to do, it was really satisfying, but I really feel like it could have used another round of challenges. All that's required is to pull a lever as Roman, which lets you switch over to Freya as she solves one half of this dial puzzle. And then as Roman again, you have to trigger a pressure plate which spawns an enemy that you could bait onto this other pressure plate, where its dead body will raise a gate that lets you pull a lever to raise a different gate for Freya. Once she solves the last half of the puzzle, that's the end of the fight, which to me at least sort of comes off as half-baked. Not only does it feel to me like it needed at least one more phase to it, but both of the times that you're forced to keep Roman in place and hold a lever, he's well out of harm's way, making the last boss in the game only ever a threat for the brief moments that it takes for you to get to the spot that spawns an enemy, which is like 5% of the total encounter. I mean, it's not a bad puzzle fight thing necessarily, but it does sort of feel like it's too low stakes to be the last hurdle standing between you and post-trauma's end credits. Speaking of which, once you've lined up the rings properly, the gate in front of the exit starts to lift, and in what I would call the good ending, Jill shows up to save the day and brings down a massive spiked piece of room decoration on Henry, giving you and Freya a chance to make a break for it. And here at the exit is when Roman decides to let his internal guilt out, finally stating out loud what it is that landed him here. Like I assume a lot of people will have assumed after clearing the hospital section, the massive accident that caused the mass casualty event wasn't quite so accidental. A depressed Roman was at the helm of his train, and according to him, he wasn't exactly wanting to die, but tired of waiting for it to happen. Dude just wanted to skip to his own finale. For him, it was a short moment of darkness, but it resulted in a lot of people meeting their ends, essentially at his hands. Having heard his confession, Freya believes that it's sincere and follows suit. She admits that she didn't actually kill her classmate, but she still feels an incredible amount of guilt for having witnessed her abuse and doing nothing to stop it. Unable to apologize to Helen herself, she does it to Roman, and he accepts. Now that the two have helped each other at least start the process of acceptance and possibly forgiveness, they hold hands and prepare for whatever lies on the other side of the door. And in a move that feels really fitting for this type of a story, we never actually get to see what fate has in store for Roman and Freya. Instead, we're left with a slow fade to black, the game's ending credits, and an opportunity to start going over the events we just witnessed with a fine-tooth comb. So what do you say we go ahead and do that?
Oh, no, hush.
At its core, post-trauma is a story of guilt, revenge, and ultimately, or ideally, forgiveness. This particular play is made up of 4 actors: Roman, Freya, Jill, and Carlos. And to be honest, that's almost the sum total of information that the game is willing to give up. Much like the series that inspired it, Post-Trauma is very much a fan of leaving little narrative breadcrumbs for the attentive player to follow throughout the experience, but also allowing enough open room for interpretation so that each person might arrive at their own conclusion. Now, in my mind, the game excels on 2 separate fronts. Once again, like its inspiration Silent Hill, there is very much a concrete series of events and explanations to be found here. It's just some of the particulars surrounding those ideas are left up to us to decide. And B, a lot of those explanations aren't exactly hidden, but might require a sharp eye to suss out. So that being the case, let's engage in a good combination of analysis and theory crafting.
I will have my fun.
Starting off, we have our main character. Roman is a not quite elderly, but not quite middle-aged train conductor who I believe was suffering from some sort of a fatal illness and in a moment of dread decided to end things by crashing the train that he was driving. Now I'll be honest, I don't think there's any actual concrete proof for my assumption about his illness, but hear me out on this one. His dialogue at the end of the game, at least to me, seems to be leaning in that direction, but also as you play, you might every once in a while catch him coughing. I know, not exactly proof of leukemia or anything, but in a game like this, I feel like it's enough to form a really solid guess. On top of this, we discover through audio recordings from Carlos that Roman is part of a very small portion of residents here that seem to show some kind of a resistance to its ability to warp and degrade people.
He's kinda like me, but let's be clear, he doesn't deserve this perk. No.
Moving on from Roman to a person affected by his actions, we have Jill, a woman who is riding Roman's train with her pregnant sister. While Jill survived the crash long enough to make it to the hospital, her sister died at the scene, which understandably messed her up pretty bad. Based on the position we find her mannequin in at the hospital, I think it's safe to assume that she took her own life, but I've got a little theory concerning that as well. However it happened, Jill ended up here in the Gloom and through a cycle of death and rebirth started transforming into a twisted shadow of her former self. Jill's kind of understandable hatred for Roman leads her to taking a different kind of revenge. She knows from experience that this place will eventually put him through the hell that she's going through. So instead of coming after him directly, she stays in the shadows watching him struggle through his torment with the intention of observing him slowly lose himself and turn into one of the Gloom's misshapen creatures. Now we know all of this because she says it out loud in a cutscene, but I think there's some more interpretive evidence to point to. During the boss fight in the school, there's a scene where Roman is close to being struck down, but just before it happens, a giant arm descends from the ceiling and crushes his attacker. After beating the game with what I would call a pretty thorough eye, I'm not sure if there's a genuine explanation for this, but I think it might be possible that this is Jill, maybe trying to save Roman so that she has the pleasure of continuing to watch him suffer. Now I do have to point out that there is a hole in this idea in the fact that the rules here seem to be that each person falls more and more away from themselves as they go through the cycle of life and death. That being the case, she should probably want this to happen to him. I'm not really sure on this one, and in the game's credit, despite going to such great lengths not to give away too much about its story, this might be the only thing that I would call genuinely unexplainable.
And Roman? I would suffer anything. Watch.
Of course, then there's Freya, a teenager who seems to have been attending some sort of a religious academy or private school where at some point she happened to witness an assault on one of her schoolmates, Helen, which for some reason she keeps to herself. This attack would eventually lead to Helen's death, I'm assuming at her own hands, and we aren't ever told the official reason for Freya withholding that kind of info, but I think it's not too far-fetched to say that the perpetrator was probably a person closely involved with the school. Maybe a well-liked teacher or an administrator who held a lot of power. Regardless, Freya came away from this experience with a lot of guilt, actually feeling like she had a hand in Helen's death.
Hello. I haven't gotten to officially meet you yet.
And lastly, we have Carlos, one of the most enigmatic and interesting characters in the game. Not exactly because he's likable or endearing. I mean, he's an absolute psychopath, but he's definitely got something special going on. Maybe it's that there's almost no concrete, out loud information in the game concerning him, but he's got easily the most substantial collection of interpretive puzzle pieces out of the entire cast.
No. This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real.
Starting off with what we actually know, according to himself, Carlos has been in the Gloom longer than anyone else besides the king. He might have been interested in leaving at some point, but now he's more keen on satisfying his, let's call them scientific curiosities.
I found the perfect test subject.
This guy is supremely interested in the Gloom's specifics and its potential limitations, how it operates, and why it affects people differently. Like we already talked about, there are people here in the Gloom who seem to show some sort of a resistance to its usual process, Carlos, of course, being one of them, so he chooses to spend his time testing exactly how far that resistance can be stretched. His main subject is a man named Henry. According to Carlos, he's engaged in some not-so-wholesome acts with girls, which gives him all the justification he needs to run a little experiment on him. one that has Carlos killing him over and over again just to see how long it takes for the gloom to fully take hold of the guy. If his own tally can be trusted, Carlos has ventilated Henry's brain cavity over 60 some odd times, leading to him eventually becoming a Japanese schoolgirl's worst nightmare. Outside of singling Henry out to test his resilience to transformation, though, Carlos also likes to toy with the other people in the gloom. When he tells Roman about the exit, he reveals that he quote-unquote used to feed newcomers to it, and we know that it was Carlos guiding Jill from the shadows to test Roman. Compared to the rest of the cast, this guy seems to be thriving here. While everyone else wants nothing more than to escape the gloom, Carlos is content poking at it and using its inhabitants as test subjects to better understand it. Even though he gives off the impression of accepting his fate, I get the feeling that he doesn't really want to leave. Like, he already had these tendencies in the real world, and the gloom finally gave him an outlet for his twisted version of the scientific method. I think the worst part, though, is that we know so little about him outside of this place. With everyone else, it's all about who they were outside the gloom, but Carlos's arc is focused almost solely on who he is inside of it. We can assume that he was either a cop or worked in a police precinct in some capacity, maybe like a cleaner, because he refers to the mannequins there by name and mentions organizing files in one of its offices. As for what brought him here in the first place, we can go back to one of his tapes where he says,
It's beautiful. A grotesque representation of what he did, of what he fears. I love it. I wonder what mine would be. A dark pool of water. The eyes of my brother looking at me.
Which does pan out, as his version of the gloom is exactly as he theorized, which leads us to guess that he either killed his brother by drowning him or maybe failed to help as he drowned. I really don't know what it is, but there is something about Carlos that just intrigues the shit out of me. Like when you see an accident in the road, the people climbing out of the wreckage are gonna grab your attention, but maybe not quite as much as the guy just casually trying to get back in.
Make peace with the gloom. There's no better way, trust me.
And even though I said the game only has 4 main characters, I feel like no discussion about post-trauma would be complete without at least broaching the topic of its setting. The gloom is, well, that's not exactly a sentence I can finish with any confidence. One thing I do know for sure, though, is that each person experiences it differently. We get confirmation of this at the game's climax when Roman tells Freya that the exit is just at the end of the train tracks, but she tells him that she only sees a hallway.
You see the exit there? At the end of the tracks.
Tracks? You mean hallway?
What?
Aside from that, we know from Carlos, Henry, and Jill that the place eventually takes away your humanity and sense of self, warping your outer appearance along with your deteriorating mental state, meaning that the creatures that Roman fights along the way are probably other, less lucky residents of the gloom. Now, I can probably guess everybody's first assumption, that this place is some kind of a purgatory for people with extreme baggage that needs to be taken care of before moving on to the afterlife. And to be fair, that very well may be the case, but I've got my own theory. I could be wrong, but I don't think you necessarily need to be dead in order to end up here. Which might be wishful thinking, but if that's not the case, I think it's kind of strange for Freya to state on a few different occasions that she doesn't actually think that she's dead.
For starters, I'm not dead. At least, don't think so.
How do we know we're not dead?
Still don't think so.
Oh, you don't?
It's the boring answer.
I mean, even when she comes to grips with her guilt, she never mentions having died at any point. On top of that, I would say Roman has at least some dialogue that might lead you in that direction as well.
Do we even have hearts here?
I don't. I can feel it beating.
Now, to counter all that, it does need to be said that the game also hints that Jill got here by adding a new exhaust port to her windpipe with a scalpel, but I think it's possible that could have been an unsuccessful attempt. I mean, for all we know, both her and Roman are actually in some sort of a coma or unresponsive state at the hospital. which would explain why the place shows up in Roman's version of the Gloom. Because if he did indeed die in the crash, I doubt he'd be really familiar with the place that they only took his dead body to. And even if he was, the Gloom version of it probably wouldn't reflect an image of the place just moments after the crash. Personally, I would like to think that the Gloom is more of an allegory for internal absolution or realization, as opposed to it being a waiting room for dead people who are carrying a little too many issues with them into the afterlife. Now, it's definitely possible that I'm completely off with this read, but I feel like there's enough small hints in the story to at least warrant it for consideration. But hey, if you've beaten the game yourself, maybe leave a comment of your interpretation, because I'd love to see if I'm the only one with this specific take. Post-trauma was, for me, an absolutely engrossing experience from start to finish. It offers up the kind of story that almost feels dynamic in what it offers. I mean, depending on your level of interest, you can effectively choose how deep this rabbit hole goes, and the further you dig, the more it'll reward you. It's not the first game to ever attempt a storytelling technique that leaves things in small, obscured pieces and asks the player to take an active role in putting most of it together. But I feel like it's one of the better examples of that approach, just nailing the shit out of the landing. In fact, if it did have one downside, it would be how easy it is to miss out on how effective of a tale it actually is. After I beat the game, I thought I had a general grasp of what had just happened, but to be totally honest, it took me sitting down to write the script for this video to realize just how much I'd missed out on. For me, there was this initial satisfaction of beating the game and wrapping up the story as I understood it. But then there was this second rush of excitement as I worked through that story to find out that it was much larger and included way more answers than I had ever imagined. If you ask me, that's the sign of a masterfully crafted narrative, and in that sense, Post-Trauma is without a doubt one of the easiest recommendations I've ever made before. I mean, if you've ever enjoyed any media that's come within spitting distance of Silent Hill, well, you've probably already played this game, but if not, it's going to be a religious experience for you. And for the general survival horror loving audience, I really can't think of anything that's not to like here. Despite being a little stingy with what it's willing to say out loud, the game has an incredibly strong cast with really impactful dialogue, and one of the most adorably endearing characters I've ever come across in the form of Freya.
Again, sir. Watch your language. I am a child.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Should we get on our ducking way then? Shit. Autocorrect. You know what I meant.
Of course, this being a great tale, it's killer, but at the end of the day, it's also a video game, which means there are other criteria to consider, and I've got good news on that front as well. Post-Trauma has some wildly enjoyable survival horror gameplay to offer. Its many settings may be a little on the small side for the most part, but what they lack in floor space, they totally make up for in immensely satisfying exploration and quite possibly some of my all-time favorite puzzles in the medium. And the music is just absolutely perfect. I mean, it's very Akira Yamaoka inspired, but it also has its own style. Lots of sad piano licks, electronic drums, weepy string instruments, and a nice smattering of that very specific surf rock sounding guitar tuning with that clean reverby sound to it. It is a genuinely solid OST, and you can get it with the game on Steam in a bundle for like $19, which I could not recommend anymore if I tried. The combat may be a little simplistic, and in any other situation that might be an issue, but there's really nothing wrong with it per se. It's just a little bare bones. On the plus side, you spend almost no time fighting compared to exploring and puzzle solving, so if it's a percentages game, we're still coming up on top. And if anything, a majority of my issues would probably be solved by a playthrough on the hard difficulty. But with that, we have stealthily slid right into the section of the video where I stop praising the game just long enough to talk a little bit of shit. Let's start off small with the game's controls. Now in some titles, movement is a sort of binary state. You're either running or you're walking. But in post-trauma, we have full analog movement, which means how far you tilt the analog stick determines how fast your character goes. Which is a great idea, and it's something that allows me to slink around in this creepy world the way that I would in real life. That being said, I think it was a bad idea to keep the analog range wide open because it's not exactly hard to have our main character walking in ultra slow motion, which looks more like a glitch than a feature, especially since he can still turn ultra fast while doing it. And side note, while getting footage of the slow motion walking, I found out there's a sweet spot on the analog stick where you can tilt it just enough to trigger movement, but not the animation tied to it, which is kind of incredible to behold.
And stop that!
Another small issue is that the game actually has an incredible save room theme that doesn't play in the save room, only when you're in the save menu, so you're only ever going to hear it for like a few seconds at a time unless you're listening to Carlos's audio tapes, which is a real shame. I was also really bothered by the game's subtitles. Now personally, whenever possible, I like a more clean, uncluttered screen, so I almost never use these things if I'm given the option not to. And on the plus side, post-trauma does let you turn them off, is what you might think looking at this menu. But really this option right here should be labeled something more appropriate like surprise me, because as I played the game, randomly subtitles would just show up in some scenes but not in others. I could really never predict if a conversation would have them or if it wouldn't, which to be fair probably wouldn't be an issue for someone just trying to play the game and enjoy it. But since I have to use footage from all over my playthrough in this video, I've got to manually go in and blur out any parts that spoil late game story revelations, which is both annoying and time consuming. And I'm gonna be a little petty here, so consider yourself warned. I feel like the colorful look of the on-screen stamina meter, it sort of takes away from the visual immersion and otherwise amazing picture that post-trauma offers. Maybe something grayish white, a straight line design, and less opacity would have been a little better. I also don't feel like it's necessary to display the equipped weapon on screen as an icon because it's already in Roman's hands and you're going to be able to see it like 85% of the time. I mean, the HUD's already sort of flirting with the idea of minimalism. Why not take it the whole way? And the last two entries in the barely matters class of complaints both concern Roman's mustache. Now don't get me wrong, I fully support this guy rocking full handlebars, but you may have already noticed it can be a little squirrely in the visuals department. In the right backlit conditions, it seems like this thing is emitting its own light, and to be honest, I'm still trying to decide if a glow-in-the-dark mustache is a bad idea or not. On top of that, during a few of the more serious cutscenes, I noticed that despite his hair not moving at all, his mustache was doing its best to recreate that one scene from Con Air when Nicolas Cage finally lets his mullet flap in the wind. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have any visual problems in a small budget indie game, but maybe you should really focus on the ones that take place during serious cutscenes, because despite how good the ending is, it is made at least a little less impactful when you notice that Roman's lip hair seems to be magnetically attracted to Freya. Now moving on to things that I'm not just half kidding about, remember when I spent like half a page of this script just glazing this game's puzzles and how I didn't need to look up any solutions? Well, there was a bit of an asterisk attached to that statement. There was one that completely stumped me. One single puzzle in the game that ground my forward progress to a complete halt. And I don't necessarily want to ruin its solution by going too in-depth here, but you've got 3 plugs and 4 places where you can find numbers painted near a cardinal direction. For 3 of those clues, you'll have 3 numbers, but here you come across 5. I'll go ahead and tell you 2 of the numbers here are duds. They have no place in this puzzle, and they throw off the logic to what I would call an unsolvable degree. Now, once you've gotten rid of the 2 numbers that have no purpose, the puzzle is still tough, but totally doable. However, it's that process of elimination where the problem lies. I really had no idea how I was supposed to come up with a method here. Of course, having looked the solution up, I now know that the barrels with the corresponding numbers of flowers on them are the ones that actually count, but honestly, I feel like that's bullshit. Either each set of numbers should have had a similar dud that needed to be eliminated, or something in the room with the set of 5 should have hinted a lot more obviously that 2 parts of its solution needed to go. Given how genius and user-friendly the logic is in every other puzzle in the game, this one specifically stands out as feeling overly brutal and unfairly unintuitive. Now on the plus side, I was able to solve this one without looking up the solution, but that's only because I brute forced the 5-number combo until I arrived at the right arrangement via process of elimination. If you ask me, this was a really bad puzzle, and if the rest of the game's offerings weren't so damn incredible, I don't think it would have burned me quite so hard. But hopefully if you're listening to this, my vague warning will set you on the right path and save you from a bit of the frustration that I got to experience. After all of that, I hope you guys got the right impression by most of those complaints bordering on not worth mentioning territory, because it was my intention to imply that post-trauma is nearly perfect. It was one hell of a psychological ride that gave me all the survival horror trimmings that I was looking for. And at an average clear time of 6 hours, when you're not trying to capture a bunch of footage for a lame-ass YouTube video, it's an incredible value. Like I've already said, this game is one of the easiest recommendations I've ever made here on this channel, and honestly, one of the best thrillers I've played in a very long time. So whoever you are, stop whatever else you're doing, pause this video, and play Post-Trauma. Not only because it's incredible, but, we're already here at the end anyway. Having said that, hopefully I see all of you again in the next one, but until then, as usual, I'm Jared. And this is Avalanche Reviews. Hey guys, thanks for dropping by. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I really don't know what to do while I'm displaying my supporters on screen, so I figured I would just let them ask me some questions and I'd answer them at random. I'd say the best update here in Tokyo so far is that me and my wife have a brand new cat. She is a ragdoll kitten and her name is Carmela, and she is the sweetest, most beautiful girl in the entire world. Also, I'm pretty stoked to say that I've been making a few friends in the Tokyo hardcore and heavy metal scene, which is kind of surreal because I've been able to spend time with members of bands that I've been listening to for years. I would say for sure Resident Evil 4 Remake. I still agree with everything I said in the review. It's a very solid video game and the parry mechanic is really fun, but for whatever reason, I really do not ever want to play it again. I can't go in any more depth than that. I don't know, something about the idea of replaying it just bores the hell out of me. Honestly, it's not even a question for me. Salty tamagoyaki all day, every day. I don't feel like eggs should be sweet, which is why I think when people put ketchup on their scrambled eggs, that is degenerate behavior and you should stop immediately. At the moment, I am running a Ryzen 7900X undervolted for better temps and boost clocks. I have 64 gigs of RAM, I believe, and the ROG Strix OC Edition 4090, which I would not recommend ever to anybody. At some point, I guess Asus started using some really wonky capacitors, and the coil whine on this thing is louder than any fan or component in my PC by a factor of 5. Recently, me and my wife just finished Solo Leveling Season 2, and that was a wild ride. I definitely recommend that. It's really lame, but really good at the same time. To be really honest though, I'm more of like an 80s, 90s, early 2000s OVA and motion picture guy, so I would say Fatal Fury motion picture, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, and the absolute best animated film ever made by human beings, Robot Carnival. If I'm being completely honest, I would probably want to remake or redo every single video that I have ever made up until about like a year ago. I mean, it's not necessarily that I don't like those videos anymore, but they're hard for me to listen to because I've learned so much over the years of how to speak into a microphone and how to properly EQ my own voice. It's gotten to the point where I just cannot listen to my old content anymore. It's like a different person made it. On top of that though, I do have a 4K upscaler now, and that does play a pretty major role in it as well. Okay, alright. I'll be honest, I'm not even really all that ashamed at the idea that I listen to Perfume or AKB48 or Wednesday Campanella, but I am genuinely embarrassed that for the past year I have listened to that one song Cold by Crossfade probably 127 times easy. In terms of guilty pleasure bands, the number 12 Looks Like You is definitely up in the running, and I am a little ashamed to say that I'm a huge Mighty Mighty Boss Tones fan. Outside of making videos or playing games, I do a lot actually. I lift weights every day. I really enjoy skateboarding, so I try to do that as much as I can. And I actually really enjoy the process of cable managing my setup here in my little room/office. So a lot of time is spent just looking for a cable that's visible and a surface that I could zip tie it to somehow. You know, I'm not really sure if a lot of people know this, but the summers here in Tokyo are kind of on par with South Florida. They're hot and humid and terrible and an affront to human decency, so I would have to say winter for both, no question. I feel like I might blow a few minds here, but I am actually straight edge. I've been drug and alcohol and tobacco free for 24 years, maybe 25, something like that. But also on top of that, I have never in my life drank alcohol. I know it's a little weird, but I never really wanted to. And then I became a bouncer, and you start to see what alcohol does to people, and that'll really scare you away. Best RE girl, that's a fight. It's definitely between Rebecca Chambers and Claire Redfield. I'm leaning more towards Claire because I enjoy Code Veronica so much, but that could change day by day. I've never cosplayed before, but I feel like if I was going to, it would either be Jet from Cowboy Bebop or Reno from FF7. That was kind of fun. We should do that more often. Thank you very, very much if you made it to this point, and a big thanks to any of the names that have scrolled by because you guys are magnificently wonderful human beings. I very much appreciate your support, and hopefully I see all of you again in the next one.